Kia ora crew, this is to act as my discussion for How the Official Curriculum Shapes Teaching and Learning by Anne-Marie and John O'Neill, which is the chapter I've been assigned for week 2 of 402. Initially I was just going to do this as PowerPoint. The reason I've done it as PowerPoint is to be able to turn this into a lesson plan potentially sort of thing one day, but I was having some trouble with uploading the full thing to Moodle, and I had a day spare, so here I am on Sunday afternoon recording this. You don't have to go through it by any means. The PowerPoint on its own is quite good, but obviously the best thing is always to read the chapter. Let's go. So, who are Anne-Marie and John? They are both affiliated with Massey University in Palmerston North. John's a professor at the Institute of Education, big job that is. He's also chairperson of the New Zealand Council for Educational Research in 2019, and has a whole bunch of other accolades as you expect a professor would. Anne-Marie is his partner, and she completed her doctorate with him as her supervisor in 2021, but she's also been working regularly as a research academic since she finished her 2004 master's, which was subsequently turned into a published chapter as well. This master's thesis examined educational policy from a Foucauldian perspective, and this analysis is highly critical of neoliberal educational policies, including globalization, and looks at the relationships between institutes and power fundamentally. I mean, that's what she's deeply, deeply interested in. The reason I mention her master's rather than her PhD is because her master's was completed just 5 years before this, and then was published 3 or 4 years before this, whereas her PhD was done 10 years after. So the master's is actually more relevant to the sort of vein that she was working on at the time, and that analysis comes through really, really, really strongly through. But who's Michael Foucault anyway? Michael Foucault, in a nutshell, basically critically examines the relationships between power and knowledge and how they are used as a form of social control, particularly in how they manifest in the state and in its institutions. And if you haven't been introduced to Foucault before, I really recommend going down the rabbit hole there. He's really, really, really important in the field of critical analysis, and in particular at looking at power relationships. His work has been adapted by thousands of academics. He's really a titan of the 20th century, and people use it to look at power in all sorts of contexts. And in particular, we're interested in him for the relationship between power and the curriculum, and educational institutions and government, and your pedagogy, and the relationships in between them. So that's what we're looking at when we critically analyze. But what do we mean to critically analyze anyway? Well, in the chapter, O'Neill and O'Neill describe practicing critical analysis as to understand how the official curriculum shapes day-to-day teaching and learning. Teachers need to understand the educational and broader social, economic, political, and cultural forces that make curriculum and the context in which it is practiced. They are using practice the verb. That's a big long quote. Let's break it down. To understand the official curriculum, teachers need to understand the educational and broader social and cultural context. It's a bit shorter now. So that's what we are doing or seeking to do through critical analysis. And as it says, you need to understand the context around what you are reading in order to be able to understand it properly. Context in this course we are not using as the preferred word. We're preferably using discourse, which is a reference back. Anyway, sorry. about this. Anyway, what does it mean to critically analyze something? To look between the world as it was portrayed and the world as it actually exists, says Sgurro. A political commitment to understanding and change grounded in a sense of suffering of others, which I really like. A sense of the suffering of others. That is by Habermas. Both of those are cited in O'Neill and Neal. There's also Grundy, which has Grundy, who is looking specifically education and is as well as similarly to O'Neill and O'Neill. He calls it the pedagogical view, and that idea is explored in the chapter. It's really, really good. They also look at Michael Apple, and then of course all of this is informed by Foucault. Just a note on Habermas, who's quoted. Habermas is a German born in 1929 in Dusseldorf. So he would have been coming of age during the war. He was actually in the Hitler Youth in his youth. But he developed and changed throughout his life. He is heavily associated. He's an associate of the Frankfurt School. And he is particularly, as well as the normal ideas that everyone at the Frankfurt School is interested in, he's particularly interested in Weber and Kant. The Frankfurt School is really instrumental in developing modern ideas around critical analysis of institutions. And Habermas came out with his own idea on his own methodologies of how to critique them, which are called commutative reality and discourse ethics. There's that discourse that we're using in this course. Whereas Foucault's ideas are generally referred to as power analytics and genealogy. And they differ slightly, but O'Neill and O'Neill are using them both very interchangeably in this chapter. It's really only when you start getting really, really deep into critical analysis that these sorts of differences become very, very relevant. The most important thing is just to have, I think, a familiarity with both of them. And yeah, I just wanted to point out that Habermas is cited, whereas Foucault is more of a deeper theme that runs throughout. These two next slides just explain more what critical analysis is, first in my words and then theirs. I'm just going to skip them because this is going over time already, but just this is more of an explanation into what critical analysis is, if I haven't made that clear enough. Once the chapter is laid out its methodologies for critical analysis and explained what critical analysis is, it goes into a really quick history of New Zealand's educational system. And near the start of that, says how historically a number of groups have attempted to use the school curriculum to achieve their social and political ends, which is a really lovely quote. As it's explaining the history, it really, the deep thing that it's trying to harken back to over and over again is the expectation that schooling will prepare young people for work, and how that idea has been present since the very beginning. There's also this lovely quote about the beginnings of the secondary school system down the bottom, which I have highlighted for you here. The secondary school system was, from its beginnings, the preserve of fee-paying, middle-class academic elite, initially assumed to be exclusively male, and those prejudices continue today, obviously, and there will be other parts of this course, I'm sure, where we will examine them more closely. I really just wanted to highlight the from the beginnings part of it, in particular, that it really, there has not been any repent. All right, speed this up. So we go through in the chapter a very quick history of New Zealand educational system. And so it starts with the Education Act 1877 which is rudimentary state primary. It's reflected in the colonial context, prepares students for the labor market, and socializes them, and monitors and controls them. By virtue of them being monitored and controlled and socialized, and all hopefully at school, that reduced crime. It also served to prepare them to be responsible voters, and as the chapter states, they're quoting Harker, facilitate the emergence of exceptional talent, which they had in quotes, and I'm keeping in quotes. I don't know, I haven't read Harker, I don't know if he explains that wasn't actually achieved a lot of the time. I don't know. I'd imagine that's what his chapter is about. Girls' Malady and the Working Class were based on popular and racist fears, pseudoscience, and biologically based assumptions framing dominant perceptions about these groups. These exclusions were to continue throughout their entire lives and generationally. So, another highlight. As we go forward from 1877 and 1904, we have a big update to the big reform of the curriculum, which provides detailed prescriptions for each subject, and it's the beginning of the divisions that we still have, really. Sets aims and objectives, which are reminiscent of more modern legislation as well. Sets examinations and standard classes. Inspector would tour the schools and ensure that the standards were upheld, so there was a tight relationship between the government and what schools are doing, and in particular the socialization functions of the institution, which speaks back to the fact that we're looking at institutional power in this critical analysis. The proficiency examination was removed in 36 or 37. I need to double check the wording in the chapter, because the New Zealand government website was saying 36, but they say 37 in the chapter. I'm not sure. It might just be both might be true depending on how the two are worded. I have to check. In 1944, the post-primary school curriculum, also known as the Thomas Report, came in, which introduced Common Core, which a lot of the classes' parents and grandparents would have gone through. It introduced free secondary school nationally. It introduced the school certificate and uni entrance, which university entrance we still have baked into NCEA. School certificate was replaced with NCEA. Suggestions for teachers were in the syllabi. Methods for teaching were left up to the schools, meaning the specific pedagogy and language used, and the little things, as they refer to it in this chapter, which I didn't put in a quote in this chapter because I didn't like that. But anyway, persists for 50 years and deeply influences the 1993 curriculum framework. It became more open and general over the course of its reign. And it's really the forefather to the modern system, which comes into effect essentially, 1993, and depends exactly on how you measure it. If you measure it from the start of the legislation being implemented, or the national discussion going in that way, or, So anyway, 1990 to current, very, very briefly. I'm sure we will cover this properly throughout this course, and not necessarily this paper, but probably in this paper. But anyway, 1990 to current. So we see changes undertaken by the Bolger, Shipley, Clark, Key, and Ardern administrations. And they're all distinct from one another, but only so much as they dare to be distinct within a neoliberal framework, which drives the whole thing. I will get into explaining what neoliberal means in a moment. Clark, in her globalization furthering objectives, which is part of the neoliberal ideology, signed New Zealand into OECD free trade agreements that render OECD are a group of 29 very wealthy countries regularly referred to free trade agreements that render our educational system lockstep with the Western world. Thus, while she reformed more radical and the more extreme neoliberal and ideas from the Shipley and Bulger reforms, she also entrenched further neoliberalization into the educational system. I wrote of her predecessors there because I am also, obviously, there's things that were hangovers from the school C system that she removed as well, that just snuck through under Bulger and Shipley without them actually deeply considering. Anyway, T. Mataaho, which is the new draft curriculum under Ardern's administration and is yet to be implemented and may not be implemented for some time, or maybe a different version of this one day, or something because we've had a change of government, yet to see. But anyway, this drafted legislation is by a significant margin the most progressive curriculum ever proposed by the government of New Zealand, but it still capitulates to globalist and neoliberal norms, ideals, and agreements most explicitly, though not exclusively, through commitments to NELP. This isn't in the chapter. I just wanted to emphasize that the neoliberal framework continues even under a very progressive curriculum and regime in our neoliberal society. But what's neoliberalism got to do with education anyway? We're talking a lot about neoliberalism. Well, I'll explain, but I'm going to be explaining specifically in relation to an educational context because my information on the definition of what neoliberalism is in direct relation. My information on the next slide is in direct relation to how it applies to teaching and learning based on the assumptions that this teaching qualification is not acting as your introduction to neoliberalism. This assumption may be incorrect, but to be honest, I don't have time to properly explain what neoliberalism is here anyway. Suffice to say that if neoliberalism is a new concept to you, then the central argument of this chapter becomes even more essential. The essential argument is that understanding the discourse, particularly the neoliberal discourse around teaching, is prerequisite to being able to critically read the official curriculum. Once understood, as teachers, your responsibility then becomes continually applying your critical analysis into the natural dialectic of the official curriculum, your critical interpretation of it, and your pedagogy. This chapter is really notable in how just unapologetically decided the explanation of neoliberalism is in it, and I really recommend this section to everyone for this specific reason. I am really enthused to see such strong critique early in this course because it emphasizes not to hold back your critical analysis of it, of what you're seeing in your day-to-day. Anyway, whether or not you're already familiar with political sociology, blah, blah, blah. Right. Anyway, but the central argument, which is there in the middle, that thing, that's the key, right? It's a constant natural dialectic between the official curriculum, your critical interpretation of the curriculum, and the written document and your pedagogy. We're going to go into that in a moment. But what is neoliberalism anyway as it pertains to education? Just very quickly, neoliberalism encourages aggressive individualism, people seen as autonomous choosers in a marketplace, extreme specialization, educational performance that is able to be closely measured and easily accessed, high levels of competence with international obligations and organizations and treaties and agreements and all these things, de-skilling of work and therefore necessary education needed for work. This refers to how a lot of the more complicated manufacturing jobs are now outsourced, and then the production lines dividing skills into smaller and smaller and smaller tasks, and the rise of service industry work in first world countries, and a lot of other things. Anyway, expansion of free markets without limit, including the bodies, minds, and culture of the students, adults, and their adults in their lives and the schools. So in terms of schools, this can refer in the chapter, as they mention, like uncritical use of ICT systems and MySpace and Facebook they're referring to. This is an outdated chapter. But digital technologies or any sort of service that's a third party that costs money for the school to use. This is encouraged under neoliberalism, where it's very rare under more historic educational policies, or a lot that exist theoretically, or other countries, or Anyway, neoliberalism discourages collective action, responsibility, or analysis. This is a problem not just for education, but in other ways, namely environmental action. Educational pursuits focused on unmarketable knowledge or pure higher thinking. So there's a hierarchy between the subjects, and STEM subjects under neoliberalism are coveted, along with things like business management, retail finance, real estate finance. So fire economy, STEM subjects. Whereas historically, these were not coveted in this way, and subjects like if you go back far enough, philosophy were held much higher than, but now we're really interested in how much extractable, marketable value we can get from the knowledge. And so if you're doing an unmarketable discipline, or something that is anti-capitalist, then it's not held to the degree of respect that other subjects in school are. And it discourages the enfranchisement of women, ethnic minorities, or the impoverished due to the status quo being beneficial for the market. And this is due to factors such as economic marginalization, so the need to make money, and economic pressures upon the lower classes, unforeseen labor divisions within the economy, so the way in which identity is used to socially stratify the labor market in ways that are unseen, or sometimes argued in reverse, where they are, and or pursuit of equal opportunity. So what that refers to, I think. Anyway, so we've got these three ideas that seem quite separate here. We've got your pedagogy, you've got what you're doing in the classroom. We've got what the government wants to intend for the curriculum, and we've got your interpretation of the curriculum. And really, what does all this neoliberalism stuff, where does it fit? Why are we talking about it? Well, obviously here, right? And these are some good quotes. I'm not going to go through them, but you can in the chapter. But then also here, in between them, you see they're connected by the government institutions, and the curriculum and your interpretation are connected by your critical analysis and engagement with the wider neoliberal discourse. Your pedagogy and your interpretation of the curriculum are influenced by your action on the hegemonic neoliberal discourse that you've aware of for this. So awareness of it, action on it. And then this is a more complicated relationship, the relationship directly between the government's intentions for curriculum and your pedagogy. But this is not largely neoliberal as well, and influenced by achievement as determined by educational outcomes, and the desire for human capital, and quantifiably, and as well as institutional power and institutional norms. I thought I had that there. I guess I don't on this version. and it's how you challenge these things. This just explains briefly just how strongly worded Anne-Marie and John are in this chapter. I really like this. This is an extension of the Enterprise project. I quite like that. It's a little Star Trek reference there. But also, it's a good name. You can know the Enterprise project. You could expand on that. Anyway, these tools and the planning, teaching, evaluation, reporting practices that they were intended to buttress collectively lock individual classroom teachers into a form of indentured practice in which their function is to contribute directly to enable the government to meet its larger education priorities. Like, that is strongly worded, right? Anyway, let's go. So, let's focus on the challenges. Right? Like all of these things here, all of this we can't really change. I mean, we can change, but it's more complicated, the government's intentions for the curriculum. That takes us outside of the day-to-day of teaching to be challenging that. But we can challenge the rest of it. There should be a line going down to this bottom line between the government's intentions and your interpretation as well. We can challenge the rest of it quite easily in our day-to-day, because it is teachers who interpret the curriculum. See, that's what that quote's exactly saying. It's talking about this interpretation. Anyway, so O'Neill and O'Neill explore ways that the teacher can challenge the system, and they introduced this epic teacher idea, which is originally from Boomer in 1989, and then it, independently by Smith in 2001 uses it. And these guys are using it, and so now I'm using it. I think we should just make epic teacher another term. And epic teacher is, in their words, describes a teacher that's critically engaging in practice, who takes the responsibility to show students how the curriculum is socially constructed rather than natural, and as such what its material effects are on students. Curriculum is thus a vehicle for engaging students critically with the world as it is. So there's two parts of that quote, that it's important, not only that the curriculum is socially constructed, but that in showing students that the curriculum is socially constructed, you can use it as a tool to build critical thinking and engage critically with the world. An epic teacher in such a classroom operates in values-driven ways. Oh my God, sorry, let me start this again. This is a quote from Smith that they cited. So this is how Smith describes the epic teacher. The epic teacher in such a classroom operates in values-driven ways, such that knowledge, values, and orientations are confronts so as to provide pathways to self-reliance among the least advantaged. The role of the teacher is not to resile from judgment, but rather to work in educative ways that reveal the basis on which judgments are made. I think I wanted only the second half of that quote. But yeah, no, I wanted the beginning too, because of the values. It just gets messy in the middle. Anyway. So those challenges are really emphasized as the key thing. O'Neill and O'Neill part us with saying that the curriculum is the main vehicle through the government and other powerful groups can ensure social change and the production of particular kinds of citizen workers to suit their ideological agendas and materially control and deprofessionalize the work of teachers. This is an industrial and political project that has endured since the inception of state-funded education. And that really emphasizes just how strongly worded the whole thing is. And so my summary of the chapter in a paragraph is this, which is, if you're going to take anything away from this whole half an hour, I can't believe it's been half an hour again. I'm really trying to do these faster. Which is, the main takeaway from this is that it's paramount that incoming teachers realize that being critical of the curriculum is not simply some abstract idea or esoteric exercise, nor is it for us to be wary or of weary of or indolent to, because our work and the curriculum are both entrenched in global economic interests. It is essential that we examine the curriculum critically, informed, and aware of the discourse in which we and it reside. Thus, will enable us to challenge the intended curriculum to the degree in which we are free to, and infuse our students, and our community's values into it. Unawareness of the discourse will render the real ways that we challenge the curricula superficial and the values we invoke subconscious. Therefore, making regular, informed, critical analysis of what educators are being asked to do by the government is critical and continuous aspect of practicing teaching. Did I say critical? I don't know. Anyway, that's how I take away from this in a sentence.